everyone, it's Lisa. Thank you so much for joining me today. In today's video, I'm going to be making two cards with Spellbinders August Stamp of the Month and their small die of the month. So here's just a little glimpse at the two cards that I'll be making with you today. And here's a look at the stamp and small die of the month. So the stamp set is a 4x6 stamp set and it has a large floral bouquet. And it also has the solid stamps. So if you don't like to color, this set is perfect for those of you that don't like to color, because all of the black stamps that you see on here are solid stamps. So here's the large bouquet of flowers. So if you want to color, you can just stamp out that large bouquet and then color it up with your markers or your colored pencils. But then the black solids will actually fit inside of those outline stamps. So you can ink those up with your solid inks and then stamp it right into that outline image and have a quick and easy and simple card. And I'm going to use those solid stamps in my card today, so you'll be able to see how those work. And then the sentiments: life is better with you, made with love, and a gift for you. So that is the stamp of the month. And if you are also a subscriber to Spellbinders Small Die of the Month, this is the small die of the month for August. And it is this hexagon shape, and there are all of these other little hexagon drop-in dies. You can see the intricate patterns on these dies, and those will drop in nicely into those hexagon shapes in the larger die. And what's neat about those, and you'll see those in just a minute, is that the hexagon drop-ins, those all layer. So you can actually have different color papers, different color cardstocks that actually layer with those three dies. And the stamps from the stamp set will fit perfectly inside of these hexagon shapes. So I just wanted to show you what this stuff looks like when it's die cut before I make my card. So this piece will die cut this intricate piece here. I suggest having double-sided adhesive on the back of your cardstock before running that through the die cut machine, because those lines are so intricate. And it also cuts the insides out. So if you wanted to have a different color on the inside, you can die cut the inside in a different color. And then these drop-in pieces, you can see how intricate these are as well. Again, double-sided adhesive on the back of your cardstock so that you can just peel it off like a sticker. And these pieces will drop in. You can actually have a different color cardstock rather than white on the background. You can use them individually or you can layer them. And you'll see when I make my card that I will be layering them, so you'll be able to see what that looks like. And then there's also the circle dies. So that die, it cuts out just a bunch of small little circles. You can use those on the circles on the top and bottom of the hexagon, and then this piece just cuts out a bunch of little diamond shapes. So I'm going to make two cards with the Spellbinders Stamp of the Month and the Small Die of the Month. And I will link these clubs down in the description box along with all of Spellbinders subscriptions. So starting out, I'm making a Slimline card, and I'm using the Hemstitch Slimline die from Spellbinders. I'm taking the largest rectangle die and the largest dotted rectangle die and layering those up, die cutting them out, and what that gives me is this rectangle die cut piece with all of these fun dots around the edge. And then I'm just going to use my little brush tool and just run that brush over those holes just to get all those little pieces out of the holes. Next, I'm going to take that same large rectangle die. This time, instead of layering it up, I just die cut a piece of the gold mirror cardstock from Spellbinders, and it gives me a solid rectangle piece, which that will be the layer that I put underneath this white piece. So I'm just going to glue down the white piece to the top of the gold mirror cardstock, and you can see all of the beautiful gold cardstock through all of those dots. Then I'm going to take the next largest rectangle die and die cut a piece of white cardstock. And then this piece of pink cardstock I actually cut down with my paper trimmer to 7 3/4 inches by 2 3/4 inches. So I'm going to glue the smaller white rectangle onto the pink rectangle And then I will glue that piece to the larger rectangle. Next, I'm going to take a piece of white cardstock. I'm going to put some double-sided adhesive tape on the back of that white cardstock because it's just going to be easier to die cut this hexagon shape out with the adhesive on the back rather than me trying to have to put glue on the back of that when it comes out of the die cut machine. So I'm going to go ahead and run that through my die cut machine, and here is what I get. So I'm going to go ahead and peel out the white outline with the hexagons, and I'm going to stick that right onto the front of this Slimline card. So you can see how this hexagon shape, it fits nicely on the front of a Slimline card. It would also fit nicely on the front of a mini Slimline card as well. So I'm just going to press that down. And then I have a piece of gold mirror cardstock. I die cut the same die, and this piece I'm using the inside pieces. So I'm just going to peel back that adhesive backing, and I'm just going to use the two outside pieces. I'm going to leave the middle one white. Next, I'm going to take different shades of pink cardstock, and I want you to look at this particular die. This one, if you're trying to layer them, would be the back layer. This one would be the middle layer, and this one would be the top layer. Now, if you wanted to layer all three, you could, or if you wanted to use one at a time, you could, or if you wanted just to layer two, you can do that as well. But for layering all three, that is the order that it would go. And I'm just putting some double-sided adhesive tape on the back of each one of these squares that I cut out. I have a darker pink shade, a medium pink shade, and then a light pink shade just to layer up those different shades of pink. You obviously can do any colors that you want here. So after they come out of my die cut machine, I'm just going to peel back the adhesive backing to expose the sticky part and just kind of weed out all of those pieces that were in that die. And I'm going to start out by putting down the dark pink first, so that would be the bottom layer. And then this die here would be the middle layer. So I'm going to go ahead and peel that back and then weed out all of the cardstock from this die. And I'll add that one right to the top. So you can already see the pretty colors coming through at the bottom. You can see that dark pink underneath. And then I'm going to take this last die, just weed out the cardstock, and then add that directly to the top. And again, you can see the layers, and it also adds beautiful dimension as well. So I went ahead and added all of those layers again to my second hexagon shape, and I'm adding it here to the right side of my Slimline card front. And then I took the die with all of the circles, put some double-sided adhesive on the back of that, ran that through my die cut machine with the light pink cardstock, and I'm adding those circles to the circle shapes on the top row and the bottom row on each one of those hexagons. And for those middle rectangular pieces, I'm using the dark pink cardstock and just piecing those into those two rectangular shapes there on the front of the card. So I'm taking a sentiment, I'm going to do some heat embossing. I'm going to just peel away one of these hexagon shapes. This was actually the background layer from the white piece that I die cut. I'm going to use my powder tool and just sprinkle some powder on the top of that, and then I'm taking the sentiment and inking that up with some Versamark ink, stamping that down, and then I'm going to sprinkle some gold embossing powder over the top of that, and then I'm going to heat set that with my heat tool. I chose to use the gold embossing powder because I just think that the gold would look good with the gold mirror cardstock. And then I'm just going to add that right to the center hexagon shape. And look how pretty that is. I just love how this is turning out. So now I'm taking some Spellbinders gold gems, and if you look closely, you'll see that there are little holes inside each one of these little hexagon shapes, and I'm just adding the smallest gold gem inside each one of these holes. I just think it will add more gold, more sparkle to this card front. And then I'm going to take a size bigger than the smaller one that I just used and add a gold gem to the middle of each one of those circles. And then I'm going to add this to a Slimline card base. So to get your Slimline card base, you're just going to take an 8.5 by 11 sheet of white cardstock, cut it to 8.5 by 7, and then score it at 3.5 inches on the 7-inch side. And then just add that card front right to the top of that card base. And that completes my first card. And moving on to my second card, I'm going to be using the stamp set with the flowers. So I have here a piece of cardstock, which I cut down to 4.25 by 5.5, which is the same size as an A2 card front. But later on, after I do all my stamping and before I put it on my card front, I'm going to end up trimming this front down to 4.125 by 5 3/8. So I go ahead and stamp out one of the flower stamps in the bottom corner, and then I'm going to wipe up all the ink off that stamp, and I'm going to reposition that stamp in the opposite corner, and I'm going to repeat the process. Now I'm just using regular white cardstock, and the ink I'm using is the Versafine black ink. And I'm going to actually be putting this stamp in all 4 corners. If you wanted just to do one corner, that would look pretty. If you wanted to do the bottom left corner and the top right corner, so you have opposite corners in a diagonal position, you can do that. But I chose to do all 4, but all of those options would look just as beautiful. So I've already stamped it out, and now I'm just taking the solid stamps, just positioning it where it needs to go, and then once I have it in place, I'm going to close the door on my Misti, and I'm going to take some colored ink. In this case, I'm using the Pink Fresh Studio Sparkling Rose ink, which is a pink ink, and I'm just inking that up and then stamping it down. And I'm using my Misti just because if I don't get a good impression the first time, I can go over this as many times as I want because the paper will stay in the same position. So use your lighter ink on your first stamp here on the larger flower, and then you're going to be able to come in with a darker ink to add your shadow. So I'm going to go ahead and take out the stamp for the shadow on that large flower, put it in place. And the ink I'm using here is the Pink Fresh Studio Raspberry Bliss. So then I'm going to add the center, and for the center I'm using a yellow ink, and this is the Pink Fresh Studio Sweet Mustard ink. And that large flower is now complete, so I'm just moving on to the smaller flowers. There's only one solid for the smaller flower, so I'm just position that in place, and then I'm using a blue ink. This blue ink is the Blue Jay ink from Pink Fresh Studio. And now I'm going to go ahead and ink up this other pink flower. So again, put down the lighter ink, and that floral stamp does have a shadow stamp, but I actually moved on to the other smaller flowers, and I'll come back to that other pink flower. So I go ahead and stamp out the blue on the smaller flowers, same blue as I used for the other blue flower stamps. And then here is where I come in and stamp up the darker pink for that shadow. There is a stamp for the bottom of that flower, so I go ahead and line that up and ink that up with the Key Lime ink from Pink Fresh Studio. And then here is my completed background. So I went ahead and did the rest of that off camera. And then I decided I actually wanted to fill in those white gaps on the sides and put some smaller flowers in there. I didn't want that white gap there showing, so I went ahead and I positioned the stamp where I want it to go. I masked off the flower that was right next to the one that I wanted to ink up, just using some washi tape. Then I inked up the flower, the smaller flower that I wanted, and then I just removed the washi tape from the stamp, and then I stamped that down onto my panel. Just wiped off all of that ink, and I did the same thing to the other white space on that card. So I just masked off the flowers that were sitting right next to the one I needed to ink up, using some washi tape just to mask that off. And then I'll ink that up with the same black ink, and then I'll remove that washi tape, and then I will stamp that down onto my panel. Now I'm just going to stick a piece of white printer paper underneath that panel because I need to ink up with the solid and I didn't want to get the ink on my Misti. So next I wanted to add some color to the edges of this panel. So I'm just taking some of my yellow ink. This is the Scattered Straw Distress ink, and just inking up the edges to get rid of all of that white around and just put a nice little yellow border around the edge of this card front. So here's a look at the panel, and now I'm going to go ahead and add a sentiment, and I'm going to use this gold mirror cardstock die cut from my previous card. This is where I die cut the previous card and used the fill on the hexagon shape. So here I'm just using the outline. I just trimmed one of the pieces of the outline and then just added it to the center of the card front. And here I'm using a white piece of cardstock that came from the fill of the white hexagon shape that I die cut. And I'm just going to stamp out in some black ink the sentiment. So it says, "Life is better with you." And then I'm going to add that sentiment directly to the middle of that hexagon shape there on the center of the card. And I just love how this card is turning out. Now, because this card front is actually the same size as an A2 size card, it's 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, you can technically just put glue on this and slap it on a A2 size card front. But I wanted an actual white border to show all around it. So what I did is I ended up cutting off a little bit of cardstock on all 4 sides. I end up trimming it down to 4 1/8 by 5 3/8, just so that it would fit on an A2 size card front and have a little border, a little white border showing on the edges. So I've already trimmed it off camera, and now I'm just adding it to my card front, and you can see that white border along the edges. So that completes this card. If you're interested in finding more about Spellbinders clubs, take a look at the link in the description box below. And if you like this video, please give me a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe for more card making inspiration. Have a great day, everyone. Bye-bye.